Good day. I am David Alexander Tejo Purnomo, and I will be presenting our ACMT-IST 2021 work, Similar Trajectory Search with Spatio-temporal Deep Representation Learning. Similar trajectory search is a crucial task that facilitates many downstream spatial data analytic applications. Essentially, given a query trajectory, a database of trajectories, and an arbitrary trajectory similarity function, similar trajectory search is a task of finding the trajectory in the database that is the most similar to the query trajectory according to the similarity function. Current similar trajectory search literature has several flaws. They mostly focus on the spatial aspect, they mainly revolve around point-to-point comparisons, and for the few literatures that use both the spatial and temporal aspect, only a single balancing variable is used. This causes three problems that hinder accuracy. The first problem is the temporal differences between trajectories. We illustrate this using an example. To the left, there are two pairs of trajectories with identical timestamps. In this scenario, due to the spatial coordinates, the blue trajectory is more similar to the red trajectory compared to the black trajectory. The scenario is different on the pairs of trajectories to the right. Now the red and blue pair have the same spatial coordinates but different timestamps, while the red and black pair have slightly different spatial coordinates but identical timestamps. As we can see from this example, similarity between trajectory rely not only on the spatial aspect but also the temporal aspect of the data, and the importance of each changes for each different trajectories. The second problem is the non-uniform sampling rate. Here we have two trajectories, red and blue, but due to errors, some points of the blue trajectory are not recorded. If you're looking at only the recorded points, the red and blue trajectory have different shapes even though they cover a similar path. Thus, missing trajectory points due to non-uniform sampling rate may give different shapes to the same trajectory. The third problem is GPS errors. Due to causes such as signal interference, the spatial coordinates recorded may suffer from some spatial errors. These small GPS errors may be accumulated from point to point, causing inaccuracies in the trajectory similarity computation. Our method addresses these three problems. To address problem 1, we learn a trajectory representation that also takes into account the temporal aspect of the data. For problem 2, we consider trajectory movement patterns in addition to the individual trajectory points themselves. For problem 3, we use a novel three-dimensional spatio-temporal grid to assign similar vector representations for points that are close to each other. In our work, we utilize a deep neural network model due to its performance in many different fields. In particular, we use the sequence autoencoder model with an attention layer. This deep neural network model is unable to take raw trajectory points as inputs. Thus, we have to convert them into feature vectors. We use a three-dimensional grid that covers the entire space containing all trajectories and also the full 24 hours period. Each cell in the grid is represented with a trainable feature vector. Each trajectory point is then mapped to a grid to find its matching feature vector, which will represent that trajectory point when it's fed into the deep neural network model. To train the model, we use three loss functions. The first is the representation loss that compares the vector representation of the trajectories. This loss is based on the triplet loss and uses negative sampling. The second loss is the point-to-point loss, which is inspired by NLP. The third loss is the pattern loss, which uses a novel idea of capturing movement patterns of the trajectory both spatially and temporally. We use two datasets for our experiments, the Porto taxi data and the Chengdu taxi data. We provide the heat maps of both datasets to show their spatial distribution. We performed 4 sets of experiments to test the robustness of our method. In the first experiment, we varied the database size to assess our method's overall performance. In the second experiment, we varied the downsampling rate to assess our method's robustness to the non-uniform sampling rate problem. For the third experiment, we varied the spatial distortion rate to assess our method's robustness to GPS errors. And for the fourth experiment, we varied the temporal distortion rate to assess our method's capability to discern temporal differences between trajectories. We use two groups of baselines. The first group is the spatio-temporal method, where we extend the classic point-to-point based method to the spatio-temporal case. The second is the spatial-only method, where we use the state-of-the-art deep neural network-based model T2VEC. From the experiment results, we can see that our model overall performs better compared to the baselines. In particular, the spatio-temporal models greatly outperform the spatial-only method, signifying the importance of using both the spatial and temporal aspects of the data. Our model also performs well in the spatial and temporal distortion experiments as shown in these tables. We also perform a set of efficiency experiments. Here we can see that our method is much more efficient compared to the other spatio-temporal methods. T2VEC managed to outperform our model's efficiency because it does not require taking into account the extra temporal dimension. And with that is the reference to the T2VEC paper. And this is the end of my presentation. And thank you for your time and attention.